Guys, Mr. Gibson here. So for this activity, you are doing what's called Mendelian genetics, okay? So basically that is the simpler kind of genetics where everything is based on dominant and recessive traits, which is what you're used to using so far, okay? So basically, to give you a little bit of background, there was a monk by the name of Gregor Mendel. He was an Augustinian monk, okay? And part of being an Augustinian monk back in the day was they had to find ways in which they could benefit the community that their monastery was in. Okay, so what he was doing is he was experimenting with different kinds of crops to see if he could, maybe increase how much food they produce or increase the season, like the time that they can grow during the year, so that people in the community could have more food. And so what he started doing was experimenting with pea plants. And through his experiments, he basically discovered what we now understand as dominant and recessive traits. And well, now we call them dominant recessive alleles. He didn't understand, about genes or alleles or anything like that, but he did recognize that some traits in the pea plants, like flower color, texture, pea color, were dominant to other traits, which we now know is recessive. Okay. So what we're going to do with combining his findings with your knowledge of meiosis and how those gametes are made and how all those alleles kind of get distributed into the gametes, we're going to use those two things together to predict the genotypes and the phenotypes of offspring of given parents in the scenario. So what you're going to do is you're going to open this. This is all going to be done on Cami. Sorry for the poor quality. I had to scan this because it was originally a hard copy. Okay. So here we have Mendelian genetics, and there are a couple of parts to this that I'm going to help you work through, okay? So part one is just the introduction. It talks about how your traits are inherited, okay? Let's see if we can. All right, there you go. So it was kind of zoomed in for me. So the way I fixed that was I went up here and hit fit page, and that may help. You can zoom in and out with that. Okay, so here we go. Basically, this is just your opinion kind of thing. So you're going to go through, and for each of these traits, you're going to put an X. You can draw it, you can type it, whatever you want to do, for whether you think that trait is based on nature, meaning that you inherit it, or if that trait is based on nurture, meaning it's based on how you were raised or influenced by your environment. So like brown eyes, you inherit your eye color, okay? I can't think of anything that would happen in your environment growing up that would change your eye color to brown. So that you're gonna put an X for nature there. Yeah, so you're gonna do that, and that's just kind of what you think, whatever you think is there. You can put an X for both if you think it's a mixture of both, okay? Then in part two, it gives you the background on Gregor Mendel and all his experiments and kind of all that stuff. Here's a picture of him. And then that continues on to this page where you have two chromosomes here, a father and a mother. So this is inherited by one chromosome from the dad, one from mom. So this is paternal and maternal DNA here. And here you can see the gene for black fur color and the gene for brown fur color. And it gives you a scenario, and you have to say which parent is homozygous dominant, which parent is homozygous recessive, and all that stuff, okay? You're going to answer those. Then you're going to go to here. This page, part 3, teaches you how to use what is called a Punnett square. And so basically what we can do with a Punnett square is you draw 4 boxes, and you take the genotype or the alleles, the possible alleles inherited from a parent on the top. It could be the mom, could be the dad, doesn't matter who you put up there. And then for the other parent, you put the alleles that they have on the side. And remember, it's random how those alleles get passed on because of independent assortment during meiosis. So we have to basically use a Punnett square to run all the possible ways that an offspring would inherit these alleles, all the different possibilities, okay? So let's do this one together. and so that you guys shouldn't have any trouble with the rest of them. Okay, so tongue rolling is it follows simple Mendelian genetics. Okay, your ability to roll your tongue. So when you stick your tongue out, you can roll it. Okay, that is a dominant or recessive trait. So the ability to roll your tongue, if you can do that, you have the dominant trait. If you can't do it, you have the recessive trait. Okay, so here's the scenario: a man has a genotype of capital R, lowercase r, so he's heterozygous. He's got one dominant, one recessive allele. R being dominant for the ability to roll the tongue, lowercase r being recessive for not being able to roll the tongue. This means he is able to roll his tongue, okay, because the dominant trait always overtakes the recessive one if they're together. Okay, a woman also has a genotype of capital lowercase, so she's also heterozygous and therefore has the ability to roll her tongue as well. So let's say these two people decide to have an offspring. The genotype of the cross is heterozygous and heterozygous, so the two parents, those are their genotypes. This means it is a cross between two parents who can roll their tongue. So let's complete a Punnett square. So the genotype, the cross, is already given to us. Where's our text box? So here we're going to type one parent's. Oh, that's incredibly small. So we're going to have one parent's genotype here, capital lowercase. And we're going to have one parent's here, capital lowercase. There we go. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take the alleles from each parent and genotype and put one parent on top, one parent on the side. It doesn't matter who you pick. So one parent goes on top, so one capital R goes here, one lowercase r goes here. Oops, lowercase. We can't split up the parent genotypes, okay? Because it's important to understand that the offspring would be inheriting possibly these genotypes, these alleles from sex cells of one parent, and then these from the sex cells of another parent. Okay. There we go. Now, all we do for a Punnett square is we cross, or where these would intersect in these boxes will be the possible genotype of the offspring. So here, for box 1, capital R intersects with capital R. So the genotype would be big R, okay, or homozygous dominant, okay. Here we have little r would intersect with the capital R here for box 2. Now, it's usually proper to always type the capital one first. The dominant one comes first. So that offspring, we have that chance that the offspring would be heterozygous. And here we have the big R intersecting with the little r for box 3. There we go. And here we have the little r intersecting with the little r for box 4. Homozygous recessive. Okay, so there are all the possible genotypes that the offspring could have if one of their parents was heterozygous and the other parent was heterozygous for tongue rolling. Okay, so now let's fill out this chart. For box 1, offspring 1, what was the genotype? Well, it was homozygous dominant, capital R, capital R. What was the phenotype? Well, they've got two dominant alleles, and the ability to roll your tongue is dominant. So their phenotype, or the, oops, I didn't mean to do that, or the trait, okay, would be the ability to roll their tongue. So they can roll their tongue. And phenotype is the trait. The genotype is the letters. It's the alleles that they have. Phenotype is the trait. Are they homozygous or heterozygous? Remember, homo, the prefix means same. Hetero means different. So they have two the same letters, two capital letters, so they are homozygous. And they're actually homozygous dominant. Okay. There we go. All right, offspring 2. Over here, their genotype is heterozygous, capital lowercase. It's a phenotype. Well, remember, ability to roll your tongue is dominant, and even if you have that recessive trait there, the dominant overtakes the recessive. So their phenotype is they can still roll their tongue. And over here, are they heterozygous or homozygous? Well, you've got two different letters. Hetero means different. You've got a capital and a lowercase here, so they are heterozygous. Boom, there we go. Now for offspring 3, it's going to be the same as offspring 2. Capital R, lowercase r, heterozygous. Capital, lowercase. They can roll their tongue. And they are also heterozygous. So they have two different alleles, one dominant, one recessive. All right. Now, offspring 4, they are lowercase r, lowercase r. Okay. See here, lowercase r. Now, they have two recessive traits. There is no dominant trait in this genotype, or dominant allele, excuse me, in this genotype, meaning they can't roll their tongue. They don't have the allele to be able to do it. So the recessive trait or inability to roll your tongue is going to be expressed here. Can't roll tongue. And are they homozygous or heterozygous? Well, they've got two lowercase alleles now, meaning they are homozygous, just homozygous recessive instead of homozygous dominant. Okay. Now, here we go with ratios. The parent cross is usually called the P generation. And the first generation of offspring is called the F1 generation. I'm not sure why we use the letter F, but that's what they use. Okay. And so this is the F1 generation here. And it wants to know, what is the genotypic ratio? So basically a ratio is answering how many of one thing do you have compared to something else. Okay. So a genotypic ratio is a ratio of all the different genotypes to each other. So here's what the genotypic ratio would be. You've got one homozygous dominant for every two heterozygous you have, and one homozygous recessive. So it's 1 to 2 to 1. Okay. Now, what's the phenotypic ratio? Well, that's the ratio of the different phenotypes to another phenotype. So here we have 3 offspring can roll their tongue, 1 cannot. So the phenotypic ratio is going to be 3 to 1. 3 can, 1 cannot. And number 3, state the difference between a genotype and a phenotype. So a genotype is just the alleles, okay? It's the alleles of the offspring or the parent. A phenotype is the trait that is expressed, okay? So you can have different genotypes and have the same phenotype. So like offspring 1 has the genotype homozygous dominant, and they can roll their tongue. But offspring 2 and 3, their genotypes are heterozygous, but their phenotype is the same. They can still roll their tongue. Okay. Now you're going to do this for this one here, and kind of answer some questions about that, and then you should be good to go. Okay. Good luck, guys.